What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be walking you through my interview process with PwC. I will say that this is one of the longer interview processes that I've been a part of. From start to finish, it took about 2 months, which is pretty long considering I only had 3 interviews. Well, 4 if you consider the recruiter that I talked to and kind of did the initial screening with, but 3 with actual PwC employees who would be, above me or were part of the interview process. If you watched my very last video, you know that when I was applying, I was only targeting a few specific companies. So why was PwC on that list and why did I want to work at PwC? So PwC is part of the Big Four. They're a very large company. They come with a lot of brand recognition, and honestly, the work that they do is really interesting and is completely different than what I do now. Along with that, you could potentially travel, which was something that I was kind of interested in. And I knew a lot of people that worked there who had really good references and a lot of people who really vouched for the company. And so it was just a company that I thought would be, something that was really exciting, really new. And so I figured I would apply and just see where it goes and kind of do my research along the way to see if this would be a good fit for me. So how did I actually apply and get in contact with the recruiter at PwC? Well, I went on the career page on PwC's website just to see if there were any jobs I felt like I actually fit with, because I wasn't going to apply if there weren't any jobs, centered around data analytics or things like that. And when I went on there, I found one that I thought was just about perfect, almost everything that I was looking for. It was a senior associate or a senior level position, and it was for a data analyst with pharmaceuticals. And so they were looking for someone who had pharmaceutical experience, which is my background. And so it was just a really good fit. And so I went on LinkedIn, I tried to reach out to a few recruiters, and I didn't hear anything back. And that happens, right? I always tell people, go for it, see if you can reach out. That's the best way to do it. But oftentimes you won't hear anything back, and that happened to me. So I just decided to apply the regular way. I did reach out to some friends who already worked there, and I said, hey, I'm not hearing anything back. What's the best way to apply? And they had no idea. And then that's totally fine as well. I was just like, hey, no problem. I appreciate it. I'll let you know if I have any other questions, right? So I applied, and it took about maybe 4 or 5 days until I actually had a recruiter reach out to me. So when the recruiter called me, she asked me a lot of questions. And so I took a few notes, just ones that I remember that I know she asked. So I'm going to read through those really quickly and just give you some of my thoughts on them. So initially, they just wanted really high level information. She asked questions like, tell me about yourself and tell me a little bit about your work history. So really just kind of walking through my resume. And then tell me about how you've used SQL and Python as stated on your resume. So again, I just went a little bit more in depth than how I actually have it on my resume. She asked me why I wanted to work at PwC, and I think that's a really good question because honestly, PwC is a very unique company. It's a unique work-life balance and style of work, and so I understand why they asked that question because there are people who are not fit for consulting and that kind of work. And so, I try to answer that the best I could, that I know the work, I know what it takes to be in that field, and that's something that I'm actively pursuing and I think is really interesting. I think that's always a good thing. Why do you think you'll be a good fit for this position? Again, very similar, why do you think consulting at this level is for you? This is a senior associate position. Why do you think you're a good fit? And then the very last question that she asked, and again, all of that went really well. I feel like almost everything I had lined up with that. And in there, I talked a little bit about my pharmaceutical experience, what kind of data I've worked with. I don't think she actively knows about pharmaceuticals, so I didn't go super in depth with it, right? More, again, high level stuff. But I kind of wove that in there because, again, this was a data analyst position in pharmaceuticals. So, of course, I tried to incorporate that. The very last question she asked is, what are my salary expectations? Now, I don't know what you believe or what you've been told, but I have worked with enough recruiters to know that, honestly, they really are trying to work for you. And I don't want to waste their time and they don't want to waste my time. And if my salary expectations are way above or way below what they're looking for, it could just be a mismatch and a misalignment in terms of expectations. And, we walk our separate ways. So if I'm demanding like 150 and their budget's like 85, they're just gonna be like, look, we can't afford you. And then that's it. And it is what it is. I told her 105 to 120. Now, why did I give that range? I could just go in there and say 120. That's what I'm looking for. But again, I don't know their range. And I didn't really care, honestly, because I wanted a raise from my current salary. And you guys know what my current salary was. I wanted a raise, and that's what I wanted, right? Wasn't expecting, 130, 140. That would have been kind of crazy. That's what I was expecting. And so I wanted her to know that if you guys are within that range, we're good to go. And she confirmed, that's a good range to be at. We should be good to go. And so we continued on. Basically, the review from that, or the feedback that I got from that from her right then, was that this sounds great. I seem like a really good fit, and she's going to reach out to the hiring manager or the senior manager who I, ended up talking with, and she's going to see if they can get me in for an interview. So now let's get into the 3 interviews that I had with the PwC employees. Again, the first one was with the hiring manager, and he was a senior manager at PwC. Then there was a director and then another director. Now, there's a lot of overlap in the questions that they asked, although I will highlight a little bit of the differences in each one. But I'm going to go most in depth in the first one because I remember most of the questions that were asked in that interview. So of course, these interviews are over Zoom. And when I get in there with the senior manager, he greets me and he goes into a little bit about the position, about himself, and basically hands it over to me, and he just wants to kind of get to know me a little bit. And so he says, tell me about yourself. So, I go a little bit into, my work history as well as a little bit of personal. I always like to add a little bit of like who I am outside of the office. They may not care or want to hear that, but, I think it makes me a little bit more relatable, a little bit more personable. Again, I have a list of questions. I'm just going to kind of, touch on those really quick. They asked a lot about my experience. So they were really, he specifically was really interested in my healthcare experience. What kind of healthcare data have I worked with? Have I worked with claims data? Have I worked with PHI? Have I worked with pharmaceutical data? And we talked about that, I would say, the majority of the interview. And this was an hour-long interview. And so it was quite a bit of time specifically honing in on the type of data that I've used and worked with within the healthcare pharmaceutical space. And so after that, again, centered around pharmaceuticals, he was asking very specifically, what kind of teams, what kind of pricing data, what kind of pharmaceutical data have I used? I probably just said the same thing twice, but again, a lot of pharmaceutical healthcare, what do you know? He did ask me about what analytical tools I've used, asked if I knew SQL, Python, any cloud platforms, things like that, because kind of wanted to gauge my skill level as well as just the things that I used and I know. Asked about, similar question to what the recruiter said, which is why PwC? Why do you want to work here? One thing that was interesting that he said, a lot of people do this backwards of what you're doing. A lot of people will start in consulting and then they'll go and try to work for a Fortune 500 company and get, a typical 9 to 5. He's like, but you're doing it in reverse, which happens, of course, but, tell me why you want to make that jump, why you want to go from a steady 9 to 5 salaried to this, different hours, still salaried, but, different in a way because you'll be working a lot more hours. Why would you want to do that? And so I kind of walked him through that. At the end of it, again, I think everything went really well. He was, again, throughout the interview, when I was saying things, I was getting a lot of good feedback saying, that's what we're looking for. Here's some of the things that we actually do. It was very much a conversation. It went really well. And at the end, he gave me time to ask some questions. Here were the 3 questions that I asked. I wrote them down because I like writing down my questions. So these are basically the ones I asked. I asked about the team that I would be working with, if we have a set team that we work with, or if they pull from different departments to kind of cater to each project. And, not to go into it too much, but basically they pull from all over the country or the world, even for basically project to project. They don't have a set team that I'd be working with. So any project that I work with, it could be completely new people that I've never worked with before, in a nutshell. I asked about the travel and how they're handling that with COVID. I know consultants typically travel like 50, 60, or maybe even up to 80% of their job. And I asked how that's changed things. He said that their team, the pharmaceutical analytics team, has been traveling maybe 20%, 30%. It's changed a lot. They do a lot more at-home work, which was, not a bad thing at all. And then at the very end, I basically asked about work-life balance. This is a job that I knew would take more hours than I currently worked, and I wanted to know about how they ensure that there is some type of work-life balance because I have a family. And, I was very upfront with that. I wasn't out here promising that I was going to work 80 hours a week. I basically was like, look, I have a family. I want to know that I will get to spend time with them and get weekends with them, because if not, this isn't going to work. I didn't say that explicitly, but that was kind of what I was getting at. And he said, look, we have lots of people on the team who have families, who don't work weekends and who don't work after hours. He's like, a lot of what we're doing is mostly just fluid. Like, we work when you can, we have to hit deadlines, we have to hit things. But almost nobody works weekends unless you want to. And most people are working just, up until about 5 p.m. and then they cut off. Some people, they, don't work earlier in the day and they make it up at night. He's like, but it's pretty flexible. You might work over 40 hours and it's definitely possible. But at the same time, the hours are not going to be insane like you've probably heard in the past, which was really good to hear. And so, that was a lot of that interview. I would say 90% of it was focused on my domain knowledge. So if you take anything away from this, it was that the domain knowledge for this job was 90% of what they were looking for. Of course, I didn't end up getting this job, so I don't know the actual work that would have been involved. But it sounds like domain knowledge was extremely important to them, regardless of what tools you knew, and regardless of how skilled you were at SQL, Python, Tableau, everything else. Domain knowledge. So just, something to think about. The next interview is with a director, and she asked a lot of similar questions. The one thing I will say is that she probably got even more in depth into the pharmaceutical. She was asking, very, very, I don't want to say specific, but very specific questions. She was asking, within this, within this healthcare knowledge that tell me more about that. Tell me about how you use that data. Can you explain a project that you've used that kind of data with? And so it was very, very specific. And I could tell that the way I was answering though was very satisfactory, because and each one she was like, okay, that's, we work on projects just like that. We use that kind of data to do exactly what you use it for, which was always really good to hear. It means I have the experience that they're looking for. Again, that was an hour-long interview. That was like 2 weeks after my very first interview with the hiring manager. So to back up just a second, I got on the call with the hiring manager. I got off of it. I called my recruiter, said it went really well. She said she'd follow up with him. She's, got back to me probably the next day and said everything went really well. Let's try to schedule the next one. And here's the person you'll be interviewing with. They didn't send me a link or anything to sign up for the next interview for another 3 or 4 days. So that was that whole week of waiting. That was 1 week basically of the end of the interview to actually setting up the next interview. That was 1 week. They didn't have an opening for the next week, so I had to wait until the Monday so basically 2 weeks and a day before my next interview. And so we set that up. It went well. I got through that. The second one with the director, I think was the best interview so far. We just kind of hit it off, went really well. I asked similar questions, so nothing really new. So again, I'm not going to go super in depth into that one. The third one was more interesting, so I'll highlight that one a little bit more. So the second one went well. Again, it was another probably 2.5, 3 weeks until I got the next interview. And this is my final interview. The final interview was different in the fact that this guy had done some research on me. So he had found me and was asking a lot more about my YouTube channel, which I'm going to get to all of that in a little bit, because throughout this whole process, they knew I had a YouTube channel, and I just didn't want to make that the whole video. I'll talk about that at the end. But this guy came in and he was like, hey, love your YouTube channel, man. He's like, super cool, love the videos, super high quality, best channel I've ever seen. He didn't say that, but he really liked the YouTube channel. And it was great to hear, but also a little bit intimidating because this guy's like really high up in the company that you want to work for. And so, what does he know about me? I don't know. I don't know what videos he's seen. But I would probably say for like 15, 20 minutes, we talked about that. Why did I decide to do this? What makes me do this? He talked about how his kids love YouTube and want to become YouTubers. And so he went and told his kids that, he knows a YouTuber now. And so again, just really interesting, lighthearted conversation. We talked about that for quite a while. Really interesting. And I'll get into that in a little bit. The whole interview, though, went really well. I wouldn't say it was any different than the first two. It really was talking about, just tell me a little bit more about your pharmaceutical experience. And I would say that he probably talked most of the interview. I was asking more questions than he was asking me. I really think that he just wanted to make sure that I knew everything that I was getting into, kind of. Whereas I passed the first two, and those were more making sure I was a good fit. This last one was more making sure I understood the position I wanted to be there. And so again, I'm not going to go too in depth into it. I think the same questions that apply in the first and second one, those were the biggest ones. That first one was covered 95% of what I asked and what he asked, or what they asked in general. So let's get into the YouTube stuff a little bit, because throughout this entire process, they knew that I had a YouTube channel. I want to kind of talk about how that affected the interviews and what came out of that. So first off, the hiring manager is the one who asked me about my YouTube channel. He had found me on LinkedIn, found my YouTube channel, thought it was really cool. We didn't talk about that much, but he notified the recruiter. So when I talked to the recruiter after that hiring manager, basically what she asked was, tell me a little bit about this. Why do you do it? Is it really interesting? What's it about? Do you have a link? So I sent her a link, and there was no feedback from that. It was just, that's really cool. Send me a link. And so I sent her a link. After the second interview, 2 or 3 weeks later, the recruiter called me and said, hey, that interview went really well. Can we talk a little bit more about this YouTube channel? I was like, sure, of course. What do you want to know? And she asked if it was something that I was going to be willing to give up. Asked if, my current company had an issue with it. I said, no, I've met with our legal team. I've emailed them. I've told them the type of content that I post. They've looked into it and they said, everything's clear. I can absolutely make videos for the company that I work for. And so that put her at ease a little bit, but she said, I have to bring this to our legal team to make sure that it's okay. So, in the interim, she wanted to know if it was something that I'd be willing to give up or if that was a deal breaker. And I told her it was a deal breaker. If I can't have my YouTube channel, I don't want this job. I already had a good position. I'm not looking to leave unless it's something really good. The YouTube was non-negotiable for me. You guys know I love doing this. I love you guys. I just can't do it. And she understood. And so I didn't think it was a big deal, because if they decided they didn't want me because of that, I had other opportunities, or I could just stay where I was at. And if she looked into it and it wasn't a big deal, then they could offer me a job, and fantastic. So I go into my third interview with the last director, the guy who was a fan. And after I got out of that interview, he even mentioned it in there. While we were talking about the YouTube stuff, that, she was looking into it and he hopes that's not an issue. He doesn't think that's an issue. And so again, after that interview, the recruiter calls me, says she thinks she's going to be hearing from their legal team soon. So I just wait. Again, there's no pressure from that at all. If I get it, I get it. If not, or if not, it's no big deal. So she gives me a call back a few days later, and she said that the legal team, it was totally fine, that as long as I wasn't posting negative things about the company, that it was all right, and they offered me the job. Well, some background to this is that a week before that conversation where they offered me the job, I messaged her and said, hey, I just got a job offer at my current company for a manager level position, which, as you guys know, I accepted. I said, is there any way to expedite this process? Because I had an interview and then they had to give me an offer, and, I have to accept or decline like really soon, because I already just got an offer from this other position. I don't know if I said they gave me an offer I accepted, but they had given me an offer. They had offered me the job, and I had to sign the paperwork within 3 days of them giving me the offer. And so I said, is there any way to expedite this? And she said, no, there's no way to expedite this. It's just a long process, yada, yada, which I 100% guarantee that's true. So I accepted the job after 3 days, and, they didn't get back to me for another like 4 or 5 days after that. And so in that interim of those 4 or 5 days, it was a lot of, well, if they were to offer me the job, will I accept it? And by the time it was like they called me back a week later or so and they offered me the job, my mind was already made up. I was like, I'm already accepted this position. I'm really excited about it. I think it's maybe even a better fit than the PwC job. And so it was a no-brainer for me. I just was going to turn it down. Honestly, if they had expedited that process and offered me that job 2-3 weeks ago, I would have accepted, and I wouldn't have even probably interviewed for the manager position because I didn't think I had that big of a chance. And so, that's all just part of the process, right? Every company does things differently. All these timelines for these interviews are different. There are a lot of variables, and I understand that. And so, in the end, I think I got the best job for me that I possibly could have. I think that, me turning them down was not a big deal to me. I didn't even get to the salary part of it to negotiate because I knew I wasn't accepting the position. So they offered it to me and I just said no. And that was it. I genuinely enjoyed the interviews. I think they were the most in-depth interviews I've ever done, just healthcare wise, like very, very, very domain heavy. I never got any technical question. They never did any whiteboarding questions. It was only, I would say, 90% domain specific questions. So that's what they cared about. That is the entire process. It was long. It felt like it took forever. I didn't even end up staying with them, but I know a lot of you guys are trying to get jobs at these consulting companies. And so I just wanted to give you my take on it, the things that they asked me, the things that I asked, how that whole process went. So that if you're going through that you do not feel like it's taking too long, or you feel like, you did something stupid or you didn't do something the right way. I of course, may have different experiences than you did, but, just giving my 2 cents on it because it's interesting and every company does things differently. So if you are trying to interview at PwC, there's hopefully some helpful information in there. And if not, I'm sorry, I did my best. So, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you listening and making it all this way. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next video.